Venum Sabbati, Magical Zoomorphisms of the Witch's Sabbath, interpreted in the light of ancient symbols. An essay by Kenneth Grant from his book Hidden Lore, published sometime between March 1959 and October 1963. The wine of the Sabbath is the blood of the saints which seethes in the Holy Grail. The distorting mirrors of countless centuries have produced curious images of this wine and grail, so that several waves of myth and legend have incorporated their symbolism into a vast ocean of subconscious imagery. The saints to which reference is made are pre-Christian and belong to a far older gnosis, of which but fragmentary accounts have survived. Sufficient is known, however, to assume that the agape of early Christianity carried on a magical rather than a religious tradition, wherein the blood of Charis formed the central Eucharist. Charis was the earlier Christ, the female form of the Logos, as Sophia, or wisdom, and the wisdom here implied concerned physical and psychophysical, that is to say, magical phenomena, rather than purely mystical or religious experience. She was the goddess who clothed the living word with flesh, thus manifesting matter. She spoke at set seasons through a chosen medium, the pythoness or prophetess. Originally, before the fructifying principle of spirit was known to be male or solar, the pythoness held first place in the religious consciousness of the ancients. With the new knowledge, however, came a re-evaluation of the goddess herself, who was degraded to the status of witch, sterile or inert, so long as she remained uninspired by the solar energies. She was relegated to the night and became identified with the moon, revolving in the void. Her worship degenerated into witchcraft, sorcery, and black magic, black because of the night in which it was performed. No longer regarded as the Queen of Heaven, but as the symbol of misfortune, she was evoked and propitiated by infernal rites. The ancient Egyptian Sabbath of Set or Sut Typhon, however, did embody both solar and lunar elements, and this was the combination of the great life currents referred to by the Egyptians as the Ba and the Ku. It is from this wine and the Sabbath thereof that the later medieval misconception arose. Set or Sat-an, later called Satan, was the prototype of yearning for things unknown, for the infinite. Satan means the opposer or the opposite one, and the satanic concept possessed some alluring component which made it the symbol of all man desired as complementary to himself. The goat of Mendes, Pan Satyros, and the Baphomet of the Templars were terrifying yet seductive images of a force fatal to the profane. From the horns of the ram or goat, which typified the virile solar force of male magical energy, came the idea of the horned devil of sorcery and witchcraft, which presided over the infernal sacraments of Set, as Baphomet. The sacraments involved ingredients that a later, more prurient age had come to regard as infernal and unclean, even as today the ancient Egyptian beetle which rolls the fecal globe between its mandibles has become an abhorrent thing to the minds which cannot identify the sun with such an emblem. Nonetheless, the beetle resumed for the priests of Khem a symbol of light and redemption from death or darkness, by virtue of its presumed ability to reproduce itself from its own matter. Likewise, the alchemists distilled their glowing stone of rare and wondrous virtue from an obnoxious bruise containing apparently useless ingredients, spurned by the uninitiated. The zoomorphic imagery of the Sabbath is of great interest and reflects back along the unending avenue of mirrors which constitutes an immensely protracted cycle of time. The goat or ram with outspread wings as of a giant vampire bat, The cat, toad, basilisk, beetle, serpent, spider, and even the babe whose fat went into the making of the infernal unguent have profound magical meanings which may be fathomed only at levels of human experience long antedating any known organized religion. The nocturnal and diurnal nature of these animals fitted them as types in the ancient rites and ceremonies. Most medieval Sabbatic symbolism has reference to the astral plane, where the transformations so frequently described in the literature of witchcraft were actually enacted. This plane was the plane of the dead in Egyptian symbolism, the dead being synonymous with the subconscious realms vivified only when the self entered them through the process of sleep or trance conditions. Transvection, for instance, is an astral phenomenon, the unguent applied to the body of the witch being conducive to sleep and ecstasy. The solitudes on high and barren places, or in concealed groves by running streams, always lit by baleful moonlight, the devil or horned deity indicative of desire which presided over the Sabbath, all such elements fusing at astral levels liberated a peculiar effluvium, tenuous but material, which enabled the witch to incarnate her dream sufficiently for it to be tactual to those present at the rite. The power generated from the enormous release of subconscious energy liberated by the Sabbath facilitated the actual realization of the latent wish which surfaced on the wave of mass hysteria which the ceremony induced. Set forms of belief and behavior were broken up at the Sabbath in order to free and obtain the preconceptual energy which ordinarily informs belief. From this quintessential energy, the Venum Sabbati was prepared, imbibed, and absorbed. It was in a fusion of solar and lunar energies that the secret of life and regeneration lay. The blood is the life, but the brew of the Sabbatic rites was not the red blood of animal life as it flowed through the veins of the living body, but the essential prana or ohas stored in the secret centers of energy which welled forth at certain specific seasons. The rite of the Sabbath entailed a knowledge of these seasons as well as of the centers wherein the primal Bindu abode prior to its massing in the form of flesh. It was in order to turn this blood or essence back upon itself, so that it might form itself into non-material bodies, that the Venum Sabbati was prepared and imbibed. It was in fact the matrix of all spiritual creation, or, better still, creation in the spirit form, a magical rather than a religious process. The set or seat of magical power was symbolic of the source. The Sabbath of Set, or Satan, was therefore the rite of return to the source and to that which lay beyond it, not an infernal, but in an inverse manner. Atavistic resurgence, a primal urge toward union with the divine by returning to the common source of all, is indicated by the backward symbolism peculiar to all Sabbatic ceremonies, as also of many ideas connected with witchcraft, sorcery, and magic. Whether it be the symbol of the moon presiding over nocturnal ecstasies, the words of power chanted backwards, the back-to-back dance performed in opposition to the sun's course, the devil's tail, all are instances of reversal and symbolic of will and desire turning within and down to subconscious regions, to the remote past, there to surprise the required atavism or energy for purposes of transformation, healing, initiation, construction, or destruction. This is the inner meaning of symbolic reversal, of depth instead of height, of the left or subconsciousness instead of the right, empirical or waking consciousness, of female instead of male, lunar instead of solar. The cat, as a denizen of night and associated with the moon, became a type which, in medieval times was confused with the actual animal itself. Likewise, the vampire bat, because of its highly specialized mechanism for absorbing blood and its obvious affinity with night, became an important type in the Sabbatic mysteries. But the priests of ancient times, in Egypt and elsewhere, did not wear animal masks because they were pretending to be these animals, or because they were playing some ludicrous charade that some later epoch could deride and denigrate. They assumed thereby the powers which these beasts concentrated within themselves, and which their outer forms merely betrayed, for all form bears a direct relation to the energy which it limits and defines. It was by a system akin to the atavistic resurgence already described that the priests obtained the peculiar condition of consciousness which any specific animal focused and expressed, and with it the powers and attributes corresponding. We have in the medieval mockery of the so-called Sabbath clear indication of this backward reaching, not only into a vastly remote past, for the purpose of acquiring lost powers by atavistic resurgence, but also into the preconceptual beyond of the self, where the self exists as a non-spatial, non-temporal, and eternal reality, an atom, indivisible, perfect, whole, the Atman of Hindu religious philosophy. In ancient Egypt, this atom was Atum, the sun god, going down or back, declining. The word is retained in modern language as autumn, the fall. The sacrifice of infants at the Sabbath was likewise a corruption of the metaphysical doctrine which underlies all magical ritual. The sacrifice of life in matter to life in spirit, that is to say, the returning to its source of the product of conception so that a preconceptual condition of pure awareness might be realized. The mirror of this pure and perfect state was symbolized by the moon, in whose cool silver the sun resplendently shines at night, in the unfathomable darkness of the void. In such puerile corruptions of the original rite as the recitation in reverse of the Lord's Prayer, as also in the homage offered to the hindquarters of the Sabbatic goat, we see concealed again the nature of a process that is essentially one of introversion, a path of return, renewal, and regeneration, of remembering backwards until the source is reached, and beyond the source itself, to the primal and preconceptual ocean of infinite consciousness. The night sky sown with stars gave rise to the conception, again Egyptian, of a vast goddess arched over the earth, or, more precisely, crouched as if it were on all fours over it. This was the original glyph of bringing to birth, or bearing the sun. The myriad stars shone forth as tokens of infinite possibility, great suns yet to be born, which in their season would find ingress into matter, as symbolized by the crouching form. In the later Sabbatic rite, this majestic concept became the flying witch who flew through the night straddling a broomstick, and the broom was, even at the comparatively late period of the Druids, a symbol of the sun. Medieval misconceptions about the Sabbath arose from a confusion of theological metaphysics with the purely magical physics of impersonal or elemental forces. The idea of evil arose through attributing these impersonal powers to a person in the form of one sole God or creator, the personal God made in man's image. Pantheism permitted the free function of each and every part of the psychophysical personality of man. When the elemental powers were claimed as personal possessions, that is to say, when man regarded himself not as the channel or priest of such powers, but as the possessor of them, he was forced to divide them into good and evil manifestations of his own inherent energy, in order to explain the existence in himself of seemingly disruptive or immoral forces. Thus, Satan became associated with those very energies which stemmed from the source or seat of creation. Satan, the sun in the south, was the disruptive, destructive power of nature as well as the life-giving source. In this dichotomy of function abides the entire reason for the origin of the idea of good and evil and the medieval distortion of the Sabbatic rite.